Continuing in chapter 2, today we're going to talk about literal equations and formulas. So let's start off with some vocab. A formula is an equation that expresses a relationship between certain quantities. For example, area of a rectangle is a formula, and it shows the relationship between the length and the width, right? So something along those lines. A literal equation is a formula equation that involves more than one variable. And that's the one that we are going to focus more in on today, of how to solve equations that have more than one variable for them. All right. So what we're going to be doing is, the hardest part to this is probably the simplifying part of it. The techniques that we get there, we're still using the exact same thing we've been doing. So if it's a minus, we add, we use those inverse operations. If it's multiplication, we divide. Addition, we subtract. Division, we multiply. But the hardest part is to know what we can simplify and what we can't. Okay, so if we look here at this first one, I want to solve this one for A. So my goal is, when I'm done, A is by itself. So I'm going to start off and I look at this and I say, okay, I've got a minus 2B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2B to both sides. So that's going to get me 5A is equal to 2B plus 15. I can't combine those because one has a B, one doesn't. My next step then is I'm going to divide that by 5. Now, what I'm going to do on this side is I'm going to divide it by 5, each item, because then that makes it easier to simplify. So when I look here, I am going to take, that cancels there, so I'm left with A, which is what I want. But then I have 2B over 5. Over here, 15 over 5 would simplify to just a 3. So we're going to go 2B over 5 plus 3. And that would be our solution. And like I said, knowing what we can simplify and what we can't, that's probably the hardest part to this. All right, let's take a look at number 2 here. On number 2, I want to get y by itself. So that means I need to get rid of the 12x first. So I'm going to do that by subtracting 12x. I always like to write the thing with the variable in the front. So I'm going to go negative 12x plus 28. Then we would get rid of the 4 by dividing everything by 4. And that's going to get us negative 3x plus 7. Because 4 goes into 12 3 times, 4 goes into 28 7 times. And that's how we simplify just a basic literal equation. Now, this next part, we have to do one particular step in here, and that is when we have variables on each side. Okay, so just like when we had x's on both sides of the equation, our first goal is to get that letter to the same side. So here I want to solve for p. So what I notice right away is I have a p on both sides. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move my pq over. So I'm going to minus pq. So now I have 4p minus pq minus 7r, and that equals 16. Now, I want to get anything that doesn't have a p to the other side, so I'm going to add 7r to both sides. So now I have 4p minus pq equals 7r plus 16. Now that we have this, my next thing is I'm going to do what we like to phrase it as reverse distributive property. But remember, distributive property works both ways. So if I notice over here, both of these share a p. So what I can do is I'm going to take the p out, and I'm going to divide those by p, and I would get 4 minus q inside the grouping. Then my next step now is to get rid of that. So I'm going to divide by 4 minus q. I'm going to divide by 4 minus q. Now, you'll notice I wrote that different than the last two because that's a grouping, so we can't break that apart. So I have 7r plus 16 over 4 minus q, and that would be my final answer. Okay, let's take a look at number 4. So when we see something like this, I have a v here and a v here, but I have a fraction. I want to get rid of that fraction right away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply by t.
Could you try again?
I'm going to multiply by t right off the bat. Okay, so that's going to give me 2vt equals w plus v. My next step now is I'm going to move the v to the other side, so I'm going to minus v from both. So 2vt minus v equals w. Now we're going to do that distributive property part where I take the v out. That would leave me 2t minus 1 equals w. And now my final step, I'm going to divide by 2t minus 1, 2t minus 1, and that leaves me v equals w over 2t minus 1. Okay, and that's how we do that process. Now, as we keep going, you'll notice that one of the big topics that we're going to kind of focus in on here is going from standard form to slope-intercept form. Why? And the reason why is because here in a couple chapters, we're going to be graphing and we're going to be doing this process a lot. So we might as well get some practice. It's a good formula. It's a good literal equation that we can practice solving for y. Standard form is when we have ax plus by equals c. Slope-intercept form is when it's solved for y. So here I want to get the y by itself. So the first thing I need to get rid of is the 4x. So I'm going to minus 4x from both sides. So that would leave me 2y equals negative 4x plus 10. My next step now is I'm going to divide everything by a 2. So that's going to leave me y equals negative 2x plus 5. And that would be what we would call slope-intercept form. Again, I want to do this. I want to solve it for y. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to minus my 3x. And notice I like to put my x in the front because that's how slope-intercept is written. Then I'm going to divide that by a negative 5. So that's going to leave me with, now negative divided by a negative is a positive. 3 over 5 doesn't simplify, so I'm just going to leave it 3x over 5. Positive 20 divided by a negative 5, though, is a negative 4. Okay, so we will be looking at those pretty intently as well, solving for y in an equation. But we also have these formulas. So the area of a trapezoid is A equals H times the quantity B1 plus B2, all divided by 2, where A represents the area, H represents the height, B1 represents the length of one base, and B2 represents the length of the other base. Okay? And what it wants us to do is it wants us to solve it for H. So when we look at this equation, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. So now I have 2a equals h times b1 plus b2. Now it's h times that whole grouping, so I'm going to divide by that grouping. And now we have our answer. So we have 2a over b1 plus b2, and that will equal h. Now, why do we do stuff like this? Well, if you look at part B, this is why, because part B now makes it very easy to do with our solved equation. It says, find the height when an area of 70 square feet and bases of 22 and 18. So if I plug that in, it looks like this. My height is going to equal 2 times the area, which we know is 70, Base 1 is 22, and base 2 is 18. So now 2 times 70 is 140. 22 plus 18 is 40. And now we simplify that fraction. And so that's going to simplify down to 7 over 2. We can divide that, and that would be 3.5 feet. So the height of that trapezoid is 3.5 feet. Okay? It just makes it easier sometimes, especially if I'm doing that calculation a lot. Let's say I'm trying to figure out a certain measurement to fill a spot or something like that. It helps sometimes to solve those equations for the variable and then go from there. All right, let's try another one. Here we're talking about a party. It says the total amount of money Kishi spends on pizza for a party is T equals 1349C plus 1549P. T represents the total amount of money she spends, C represents the number of cheese pizzas she buys, and P represents the number of pepperoni pizzas she buys. If Kishi has $85 to spend on pizza, describe the constraints, now that's a new word to us, on that equation. Constraints are things like, what's the maximum number you can buy? What's the minimum number you can buy? So let's stop and look at this. If I have $85 to spend, and I was thinking, like, what's the max number of cheese pizzas? Okay, so what I would do is this represents cheese right here. So I could do 85 divided by the 1349. Okay, so if we just take 85 divided by the 1349, we end up with 6.3. So if we think of that, the max number of cheese pizzas would be 6 pizzas because I can't buy 0.3 of a pizza, and if I bought 7, it would be too much. If I wanted to look, how many max pepperoni could I buy? Okay, the max pepperoni would be a very similar expression. We go 85. Here's my pepperoni, so divided by 1549. So 85 divide 15.49, and that comes out to be 5.4. So I look, the max number of pepperoni I could buy would be 5 pizzas. Okay, then the last question is, what would be the minimum of both? What would be the minimum number of pizzas that I could buy? And the answer would be 0 pizzas. I can't go negative because negative actually gives me a value that we can't buy negative number of pizzas. So the minimum of both pizzas would be 0 pizzas. Okay, so now we're going to take that and we are going to solve for C here. Okay, so I'm going to start off and I'm going to say, okay, if I have this equation and I want to get C by itself, the first thing I want to do is I want to minus the 1549P. So that's going to give me T minus 15.49P equals 13.49C. Then I would take and divide that by 13.49. So I know that T minus 15.49P over 13.49 will equal C. Okay, so then why is that important? So now here we go to part C. If Kishi has $85 to spend, so that's T. So we're going to plug that in for T. And to buy 3 pepperoni pizzas, so we have 1549 times 3, find the number of cheese pizzas. So now we just take our calculator and we start plugging in numbers. So we're going to just go all of the numerator, so 85 minus 15.49 times 3 equals, divide that by 13.49, and we end up with 2.8. So when we look at that, how many is the total we could buy? The total number of cheese pizzas would be 2 pizzas, and with the 3 pepperonis for $85. Okay, so that's how we would go through that process. The last thing here is just some extra little formulas that you need to be aware of. For example, area equals base times height. That's of your rectangles or your parallelograms. Area equals 1/2 base times height. That's the area of your triangle. Area equals pi r squared. That's your area of your circle. We have the circumference, 2 pi r. We have the diameter, or distance equals rate times time. And then we have the force equals mass times acceleration. Those are formulas that you need to be aware of as we go forward through this process.